Hi, I just moved my blog over to Gatsby, a modern JavaScript framework for creating static sites. I used a bit of Python and a lot of regexes, so let's take a look. So a quick disclaimer, I'm not a Gatsby expert and this is my first time using Gatsby. So let's have a look at what we are going to cover in this video. So we're going to have a quick look at what Gatsby is, what Gatsby Starters are, and a quick look at the starter I use for my blog. We're also going to have a look at the format of the blog post required for that Gatsby site, and what my blog post originally was in, and then how I migrated one to the other. We'll also look at how preloading works and some stats on the site after I did the migration. All the code you see in this video will be on GitHub and the links will be down below in the description. So briefly, what is Gatsby? Gatsby is a JavaScript framework and it can be used for rendering static sites. It brings a bunch of technologies together such as React and GraphQL. It automates a bunch of static site optimizations such as preloading images and page data. It also works very well with SEO and mobile. If you're wondering why I chose Gatsby, it's simply because at my previous company the front-end team were using it for the marketing content, and it was able to plug into back-ends such as Contentful and just produced a really great site that was very responsive. So a bit of history about my blog post. It started back in 2005, blogger.com I think, and then I moved it onto WordPress. I lived there for a while, I did lots of blog posts, and then eventually I wanted to move it onto a static site. So I moved it onto GitHub Pages. I basically just scraped all the pages, all the HTML, all the images, CSS, and put it as a static site on GitHub Pages. So now I have a bunch of HTML that I need to get into Gatsby. And Gatsby requires that it's in Markdown and that it has the metadata all separated out nicely. So we're going to have a look at what the requirements are for the posts, and then where my site is coming from, and then some Python code about how I got from one to the other. So first up, we need to choose a Gatsby starter. So let's take a look at that. So if we look at Gatsby's site, you can see here there's a lot of starters. We're going to look at ones for blog and navigate through those. Here's the one I actually chose, Gatsby Starter Lumen. The good thing about these is a lot of these have demos. So we can actually see the demo. It opens up in a new site. It's hosted on Netlify and you can click through, see what the site would look like. So if we go over here to GitHub, we can take a look at the website and we can use this and we can create our blog. So we're going to copy this command here and we'll paste that into the terminal. I'm actually going to call it another blog since I already have one called blog. And basically what I'm doing here is recreating what I did when I created my blog. I'm just going to hit the fast forward here. I'm not sure what this error is here, but basically we can cd into another blog and we can run Gatsby develop. And that's going to run our blog in development mode. So you can see if we open up this localhost 8000 site, we can see the blog here. It's the same as the demo. So let's have a look at what files we have here. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff here. We got changelogs, we got readmes, code of conduct, contributing, documentation, Docker files, license. So let's create a repo to push this to. So we create a new repository in GitHub and call this another blog. And we create this repository. We can then set this as the origin and then push this up. So now if we reload this, we can see all that content there. If we look at the commits, you can see we just have one initial commit, so we have no history of the starter here. So one thing I really like to do is lean on GitHub history to see how things unfolded over time. Instead of trying to keep everything in my head of, okay, I generated a site and then I removed these files and then I updated these files and then I committed that whole thing. Just do each step at a time. So make a commit that is, I generated this file. And then as you start removing things, just add those as commits and history. Doing that makes it really easy to see where things came from or why things disappeared. So let's go ahead and look at what we've got here in this repo. So if we look here, we've got Circle CI, GitHub Actions, even Travis CI. They're all running the tests and code coverage. We've also got changelogs, code of conduct, contributing, license file here. I'm going to keep the license, but I'll probably get rid of most of the other things. Docker stuff, we have Docker files and Docker Compose files. I'm not going to use any of those because I'll probably just use GitHub Actions to do the deployment. So the next step was basically cleaning up a lot of these files that I didn't need and then running the migration script that I've created. So let's take a look at the format of the posts that I have to create. So you can see here we've got metadata with the title, date, what type of template we're using, and then a slug. This identifies the post uniquely. And then category, and then a list of tags, description, and then an image to go with it. And then underneath that, once we get past the YAML block, we've actually got Markdown. So a paragraph is basically just you write the text and you have a blank line under it. Here we've got an image. This is Markdown for image, another paragraph. And so basically this whole block is Markdown, and we can put any kind of Markdown in here. I have to get my blog posts, which are in HTML, into this format. So you can see here's one of my blog posts, and it's a lot of HTML. And you can see a lot of the things I actually need for the new blog post, the metadata is all in here. So we have description, we have a title, we have lots of content, but this content will need to be broken up into blocks of paragraphs. So I obviously have a paragraph here. I have subheadings. I also have blocks of code. So this code here is in quite a nice format. It's just plain text within a pre-tag, but some of the other code in other posts is nested with a lot of HTML, and that was for syntax highlighting. Actually, let's take a look at one of those. So here's a code block here. This is Ruby code, but it's very hard to read because a lot of the keywords are actually wrapped in spans, which are setting the color and the style. And that's kind of riddled all through the code. So that obviously needs a lot of cleanup before I can put it into Markdown. And then I want to come along with the Gatsby plugin, which will actually do the syntax highlighting after the new site is generated. So I want to just clean this up, get this back into plain text and simple Markdown. So let's take a look at the quick Python script I wrote just to convert these from HTML into the Markdown and YAML format. So this repo is up on GitHub and you can find it and take a look if you want. It's pretty simple. We're using Poetry to install Python dependencies, and then we just have a conversion script here. There's kind of three main parts to this script. One is we want to traverse all the blog posts, and then for each blog post we want to pull out all the metadata. So we're using LXML to use XPaths to find that data within the HTML, and then we'll turn that into metadata. And then the other part is actually converting the larger chunk of content into Markdown. So we'll still use XPath to find that larger chunk, and then we'll break that down into smaller chunks and then convert each of those to Markdown. And then I'm doing lots of tweaks, such as replacing category names and things, as you can see in the top. So I won't get too much into this script, but you can see here where I'm pulling out the metadata. So I'm using XPaths to find it in the HTML, and I'm using this date parser to parse the date, because the date was very long and complicated, and the date is actually used in the name of the new file and also as part of the metadata. Two different formats. For the Markdown chunks, I'm pulling out the content block, and in different posts that's found in different places, but it's essentially one big div, and within that div there's multiple HTML components that I want to cycle through. The code blocks get a little bit more complicated. I basically, as I mentioned before, I want to clean those up, so I'm removing all the tags that appear there for the previous syntax highlighting. So once I've got that down into basic plain text, which is the code, I'm going to wrap that in backticks, and then I write out the YAML in a very basic way, and then after that comes the post Markdown, and then I have some more HTML that was the legacy comments, so I just add that on at the end of the post. I want to retain that HTML, and it's too complex to turn into Markdown, and that's basically it. So one package I do like that I'll mention here is this pathlib path, and that's useful because you can basically just specify a path, and then when you actually come to concatenate paths, you can do that simply in code, which is pretty useful. And then the new path that's generated from that, you can simply open that without having to turn it into a file or anything. So that makes working with paths and files really easy. So that's my simple script for doing the conversion. So let's run it and see what it looks like. So since we're using Poetry, we'll run it through that. So you can see it's run through all my old blog posts, pulled out the slugs, created new Markdown files. So let's take a look at what those new Markdown files look like. So if we run git status, we can see we've got lots of files here. So let's take a look at one of those. So you can see this file starts at the top with the metadata, and then if we scroll down, we can see We've got the Markdown, the code block. Even though my terminal is syntax highlighting it, it's not actually syntax highlighted yet, but it's just a simple plain text blob. It specifies what language it is, and it's surrounded by the free backticks. So that's a nice simple code block. See more code blocks there, that's good. We can see simple headers here. So this is a simple H2 HTML entity. We can see some links have been converted. So down at the bottom, we got this big blob of HTML, which is the legacy comments from WordPress. So I'm just keeping those as HTML because it's very complicated HTML and just wouldn't be easy to convert into Markdown. So the next step was coming into IntelliJ and basically cleaning a lot of things up. So I went through the posts, found things that didn't look right and ran a lot of regexes across all the posts to clean them up. I deleted a lot of files that I didn't need, and I basically just tweaked it until I got it in a state that I was happy with it. So the last step is running Gatsby build. So that'll build the whole site ready for production, and it'll put it into the public directory. And then all I need to do is copy those files from the public directory into my GitHub Pages repo. So you can find my GitHub Pages repo on GitHub. It's publicly available. And the only thing that wasn't generated by Gatsby is this CNAME that basically allows me to use a custom domain. One thing I've done is tag the repo. So version v1 is basically the WordPress scrape site of static HTML. And going forward, it'll be Gatsby until the next time I change it. So here's the site. Obviously, I've got some pretty old blog posts here from 8 years ago. But the nice thing now is it's reactive. So as I resize the blog, it changes. It can be read on mobile, which is all pretty good. And you can see the syntax highlighting here. If you're enjoying the video, give me a like down below. I'll wait. So if we go back, one thing I want to show you is how it loads the content. So as we scroll down, you'll see it starts to make requests. And let's take a look at those. So you see here, it's asked for page data. So it's basically preloading the blog posts before I click on them. So if I scroll down, you can see page data for each one of these blog posts. So if I actually click into one of these, it loads very quickly. Obviously this image needs a little bit of tweaking in the layout, but you can see the blog post loaded very quickly. If we look here at web.dev, which is a Google developer tool, you can see the performance is pretty good and our SEO is not too bad, but we're using all best practices. And this is a lot better than my site used to be. So that's definitely good. And then if we actually look at one of the posts, we can see that there's slightly different metrics. So the SEO on one of the blog posts is 100 and the performance is still pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. So that's my first venture into Gatsby, and I think it gives me a good platform for writing more blog posts in the future. If you've used Gatsby and you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below. Thanks for watching.